The Cognitive Process for Wisdom Development by Venerable Rungruan Papa Saro, Dr. Rungruan Lim Chu Patapa. It is apparent that although the mind may have a tendency to be contaminated by disinformation during the mind processing, but the mind has an encouraging quality in learning the truths and being able to adopt an instructed cognition from an insight observation in the Buddhist practice. In order to understand how a wisdom is developed in a wisdom study, the Buddha explained about this special cognitive quality of cognitive processing in a mind as the element of acknowledgement of mind as follows.
The mind has four special cognitive capabilities in nature, that is, when incorporating with wholesomeness, of which these capabilities of mind are very beneficial in life development as follows. 1. Life is a stream of consciousness. When having a consciousness, the mind can acknowledge on what is happening around. Thus this is the truth of the first fundamental capability of mind in acknowledging and learning capability as a cognitive process of mind. And this capability is called the element of acknowledgement. 2. The mind can accumulate and memorize through having mindfulness learning on what is happening, especially for cognitive process of the wisdom on the truths of life within nature. This is a capability of mind to gain and retain the knowledge as wisdom. 3. The mind has a capability to execute on an arising mental phenomenon within the mind. And by having mindfulness to bring in this wholesome knowledge of wisdom, then the mind is able to abandon any arising troubling mind by wisdom. 4. And as a result of having the right execution and processing of the mind, thus the mind is capable to be liberated from all arising problems. And this is a liberation of life from suffering of all kinds of problems in the world.
In simple terms, when having a consciousness, the mind will acknowledge an arrived mental object and capable to know the truth of the object of consciousness, then absorbing the mental object to gain a knowledge or wisdom of what is going on, then the mind will abandon and release this object of consciousness, saying not to attach to it. And if the mind can completely release the received mental object without incurring the five aggregated subject to cling, then the mind is liberated. That is, the mind is able to learn the truths of life within nature to free up the mind from any involvement with the world. During performing an insight observation, we can contemplate and realize that a life is simply a natural process, saying it is sort of an element in nature. Apparently, it is no self, then the mind will release an attachment to the five aggregates subject to cling, and then the mind is liberated. A life is a system which is composed of body and mind, and the mind interfacing to the world through the sense bases. The functions of mind can be considered as a beginning of an arrival of stimulus from the world through the six sense bases into the system. And as a stimulus makes a contact with the mind, immediately a consciousness arises and responds to the mental phenomenon of consciousness, then causing a chain of process execution of mind as an operating system of mind. As a result of this pattern of mind processing, several internal mental phenomena of the states of mind are generated from the mind processing will make contacts with consciousness within the mind. A mind functions as a stream of consciousness as being a life which consists of body as an input of a system receiving external stimulus from the world, and mind as an operating part of a system. A consciousness is a driving force that operates a system by fetching an individual object of consciousness one by one as an input of a system at all times, with a feeling as an output of a system. This response will induce a series of chain reactions within the mind, generating a new internal mental phenomenon, and then feeding back as a self-internal input to the system. The mind will systematically function with a set of rules as an operating system of mind, and in this study we will observe and investigate on how the mind will respond to various inputs of formatted mental phenomenon. The mind is sort of a black box of this study, and the knowledge gained from this study is called the truths of the mind or a dharma. In an insight observation of the four mindfulness foundations, we use a purified mindfulness to observe the mind processing by detecting the reality of the object of consciousness, like setting up signal processing sensors to monitor on what is happening at the body as an input of system, the feeling as an output of system, the mind as an operating of system, to have a whole picture of the Dharma in this study. Since the processing of dependent origination is very fast, and it is extremely difficult to catch up with the changing states of mind. Therefore, in the four mindfulness foundations, the Buddha suggested having a mindfulness becoming internally steadied, composed, unified, and concentrated to detect on an arising phenomenon at a particular foundation one by one, namely body, feeling, mind, and Dharma, respectively. And when observing on an arising phenomenon, objects of consciousness related to body, feeling, mind, and Dharma, then applying the 7 foundations and the 3 aspects of considerations to cognize on what happening during the insight observations. In this practice we will investigate on 2 aspects of how the mind function. Firstly, it is a contemplation on the truths of each individual mental phenomenon as a function analysis on that particular object of consciousness in 7 foundations to understand the total behaviors and characteristics of the object of consciousness. And then secondly, it is an investigating on a series of the objects of consciousness as a whole with respected to the realization of element, 6 sense bases, and the process of dependent origination as a structural analysis to have a broader understanding of the nature of life working as a system. During performing an insight observation, we can contemplate and realize that a life is simply a natural process, saying it is sort of an element in nature. Apparently, it is no self, then the mind will release an attachment to the 5 aggregates subject to cling, and then the mind is liberated by wisdom. And in one occasion the Buddha explained on how to apply these cognitive capability of mind in wisdom development as the principle of the 4 aspects of investigation on the Dharma as follows.
1. The person must investigate with respect to what she has listened and learned in accord to the Buddha's words correctly. 2. The knowledge on the Dharma must be gained from the Buddhist practice, especially in accord to the Buddha's teachings correctly. 3. The knowledge on the Dharma must be gained from an insight observation, that is, seeing the mind, including all arising phenomena as they really are, so that the person understands the mind, to understand phenomena, then to understand the fetter that arises dependent on both, and then also to understand how the unarisen fetter arises, and how the arisen fetter is abandoned, and does not arise again in the future in accord to the Buddha's words correctly. 4. The knowledge on the Dharma must be contemplated and be applicable for the cessations of all finest fetters, taints, and then liberating the mind in accord to the Buddha's words correctly.
The principle of the 4 aspects of investigation on the Dharma is very helpful in making a general assessment and even a self-assessment in performing the Buddhist practice. If a practitioner was asked about the success of the practice, he or she should be able to explain and answer the Dharma in accord to this principle, which was later simplified into simple words of a continuous improvement of studying, practicing, and accessing as the way for wisdom study in Buddhism as follows.
In Buddhism, after performing the Buddhist practice, it is very common that there will be someone who claims to success in Buddhism. In this circumstance, the Buddha suggested that we should verify whether a person is the right one or not by asking the following set of questions, and the right one should be able to answer these questions with the principle of the 4 aspects of discussion on Dharma as follows. In accord to the Buddha's teachings, what does the Buddha explain on the mind, and the arising phenomenon of the object of consciousness?
Note: being able to give the references of the Buddha's teachings. As a Buddhist who follows the Buddha's teachings, more or less practitioner should be able to remember and understand the Buddha's teachings.
After performing the Buddhist practice, how do you see on the mind, and the arising phenomenon of the object of consciousness?
Note: explaining how do you perform the Buddhist practice? This is to verify if the practitioner follows the Buddha's teachings, not just claiming so.
During performing an insight observation, what do you gain the knowledge from the arising phenomenon of the object of consciousness?
Note, explaining what do you see the Dharma during performing an insight observation? Seeing the Dharma of the truths of life within nature, not an imaginary of any superstitious figure.
After contemplating this knowledge, what is the application of using this knowledge to cease arising defilements, and then to liberate the mind?
Note, explaining how to apply the knowledge for the cessation of an arising defilement. If claiming the mind is liberated by wisdom, then it must be explainable in terms of the law of cause and effect. There is no secret or mantra which is unexplainable.